This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today I have the president of the National Police Federation here, Brian Sauve, and we're just discussing the NPF's recommendations for strengthening the Canada-US border. It's a bunch of recommendations they just put out January 28th of this year, and you'll be listening to this podcast on Monday, February 3rd. So just to give people some context, we're recording today, Friday, January 31st. The tariffs from the US are supposed to come in tomorrow, February 1st. So you're getting this in a timely manner, but we're going to add some depth to this conversation. So without further ado, say welcome to you, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. Always a pleasure to say hi and update on different things going on in the RCMP and public safety world in Canada.
Yeah, and just before we got started, as I was saying, you guys are no stranger to just running or bouncing from crisis to crisis. If it's not the border, there's bail, there's police officers getting attacked. Like you guys always have something to deal with. It's no shortage of work.
Yeah, no shortage of work, but I think it comes with the landscape, obviously. 13 jurisdictions, provincially, federally, and then obviously internationally, whether it be liaison officers in Caracas, Venezuela, or Thailand. There's always something happening with the RCMP just because of the breadth of its reach in Canada as well as worldwide.
Yeah, it's quite a task. I'd say monumental for a lot of people. But maybe I'll start with asking: did you ever expect to be? I don't know if it'd be at odds with the Americans. Maybe dealing with some of their frustrations with Canada. Maybe this is kind of a new thing for Canadian police.
Well, I don't think, the RCMP and its membership and the NPF, we're not at odds with the United States at all. In fact, the discussions we had with our cross-border law enforcement partners were actually very, very productive. And I think we share a lot of the same frustrations and challenges, just obviously from a different lens. They're looking north and we're looking south. So I don't think I ever expected the government of Canada or the RCMP to move so quickly.
Okay.
With a threat from a government south of the border. And I'm surprised they did. I'm impressed that they could. Happy that they've started paying attention to border security and bolstering it. Mm-hmm. Now it's just this is all short-term stuff. We still need to look at the medium and then the long-term sustainability plans of what that looks like.
Yeah. Maybe that's a better way of framing it. I was trying to think, I'm like, well, they're not mad at us. And for the most part, it is the people on the ground all get along with it within law enforcement. It's when you get to those politic sides of things that it's like now people are saying and doing things that maybe they don't agree. So today we're talking about the recommendations that the NPF put out. There were 4 of them. Just before we kind of dive into each one, do you want to just give us kind of a lay of the land, just a very broad view of where are we today with this whole side of things? And this is speaking specifically to the law enforcement side.
Well, and you actually hit the nail on the head a little earlier. I think one of the reasons we wanted to have these discussions is I think the membership on the ground and what they see day to day, their actual thoughts of what's needed and what the pressure points are and what the challenges are sometimes not heard or not listened to by policymakers, whether they be south of the border or north of the border. So that was one of the reasons we were like, okay, we actually reached out to, I think, 13 different organizations in the United States and in Canada. We managed to meet with 6 of them. Some of them obviously fairly small, like the Idaho State Troopers Association, not the biggest group. And, sometimes they don't have full-time dedicated people that can drop and meet on a whim. So it was an interesting setup. And, the landscape, obviously, you have a number of different agencies. So, the Canadian side, the RCMP has authority to enforce the federal side of the Immigrations Act, the Customs Enforcement Act, between ports of entry. So any land crossing, any air crossing. Those ports of entry, that authority is allowed to be carried by the Canadian Border Services Agency. However, they don't actually investigate crimes. So if you come to a land crossing and you have an illegal firearm or a trunk full of cocaine, you will be detained by CBSA, but they will call the police of jurisdiction to come and do the criminal investigation. So Toronto Airport, for example, that's Peel Regional Police. They will call at Vancouver International Airport. They'll call the RCMP. At the Coots border crossing in Alberta, they'll call the RCMP to conduct that criminal investigation. Similarly, in Ontario, between ports of entry, you've seen the OPP talk about bolstering resources to the border. The OPP doesn't actually have the authority to enforce those federal statutes of the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Act. Okay. So they could be there similarly to observe an offense, detain, and then call the RCMP, or very much like the CBSA, or they could work in partnership integrated with an RCMP team to bolster and give more boots on the ground. And that's what's confusing, I think, with the Alberta sheriffs, right? Yeah. They can enforce within the borders of Alberta, but not necessarily federal statutes such as the Immigration Act or the Customs Enforcement Act about crossing into Alberta. And then you have a similar thing in the States. You would think that it actually works very well in Canada. The partnerships between the RCMP, the OPP, the Sûreté Québec, the sheriffs, as well as CBSA, it actually works extremely well. And they integrate and they communicate and they share intelligence. In the States, you have something similar, right? Your Customs Border Protection folks, they cover the land crossings in the States. So when you cross and drive through a border at Detroit, Windsor, across the Ambassador Bridge, you see CBP. Mm-hmm. Then they have their Border Patrol, different group that does between land crossings. And then you have the inland enforcement folks, which are Immigrations Customs Enforcement, that exercise authorities for those who are illegally in the United States and have warrants for deportation or not work visas. And then your state troopers, as well as your state police, the FBI, et cetera, support those guys across the border. But you end up with challenges similar to the OPP in Ontario. The New York State Troopers don't necessarily enforce federal statutes. Okay. So they might observe an offense and then they'll call Border Patrol or they'll call CBP to come and execute or arrest or investigate that federal offense for migrants, et cetera. So a little more disjointed, just more agencies south of the border. But integration between the border, United States and Canada is actually quite good, and communication is quite good. It could be better.
Okay. Hey, you know what? That partially answers some questions I was going to ask later. So you've already done 50% of the job.
Okay.
But just before we get even more on those topics, I did want to ask too. So when this all kind of started and all this, there was like panic about tariffs and what Donald Trump was saying. Have they at any point said to law enforcement specifically, this is exactly what we're looking for? Because I think that's kind of what people they're lost in, just like the general vagueness of, we want the borders protected and we want you to stop sending fentanyl our way, or we want guns to stop coming north. But nobody's actually like quantified it as, okay, I want 500 troops here and I want this many units doing this. And once I have that, then I'm good. So it's like, what exactly are the politicians looking for in this?
Well, I don't think anybody, at least none of us, the common folk, even the unions and the NPF in our discussions with the RCMP, don't think anybody knows what the metric is that spells out success.
Okay.
And some of it are, it's just media taglines or PR ploys or presidential whims, if you will, because I think everybody has admitted and accepted the fact that the southern border in the United States is the 99% of the problem. The northern border is probably the 1% of the problem. Whether it be for fentanyl or migrants heading south, in Canada, that's not as big an issue as it is in Mexico coming north. And the numbers actually from Customs Border Protection or Border Patrol actually show that. Like the amount of illegal migration going south is minimal compared to the amount coming north from Mexico. I think we're just being lumped into, unfortunately, an ugly world of politics. And, policing should never be politicized. It's too bad.
Yeah, on the numbers, I think, and this is just based on my own knowledge of some of the stuff going on at the border or things we have shared. It's not secret stuff, but I would say that I think a lot of the issue comes up is like we only show as maybe that 1%. That's because nobody's actually been looking, and that's from the U.S. side. Like they keep saying that all this stuff is coming in, fentanyl and the illegal migration or immigration. That's because there's nobody really guarding the border. Like we pride ourselves on this big undefended border. Well, that just means that people are kind of freely roaming. And we have had cases where, like in our unit here in Edmonton, we worked with the DEA, and they were showing us just how people cross the border. Like it's pretty crazy, and a lot of it went was just wide open and free. So I think now that we do have those resources, we are going to see an uptick in whether that's guns or drug seized. As for which direction things are going, I think we're going to see it in both. I just don't know how much of an uptick there will be. The one thing that I will say too is I think that it is good that now people are paying attention to it, because it certainly is a problem. So even though we are the 1%, for myself, any conversations I have, I try not to focus on that and go like, well, Mexico's the bigger problem. It's like, but we still are a problem, whether it's 20,000, people that going south. I think it was one of the last numbers I saw. It was in the 20,000 range. I mean, it just takes one bad person to do a 9/11 style attack. So, I think while, Mexico's the bigger problem, Canada does have an issue that we do need to solve. And obviously, if it's a problem for our friends to the south, it's something that we do have to seriously look at. So it is nice that the politicians are finally starting to talk about this, and we're seeing some funding for it. To your point, definitely we have to look at the medium and long term, because this is not something that we should let up on or give up on. So,
yeah, I agree. I think one of the challenges I think we're going to see, and one of the reasons I mentioned, short term can be a public investment to address a political narrative, i.e., let's avoid tariffs by spending a whole bunch of money buying helicopters and drones and all that great stuff. So that's a very public response to what you hope is going to avoid a political showdown. Obviously, it didn't work. Some tariffs are coming tomorrow. But then the medium term and then the long term are the challenges. And I think what we saw, what our members were seeing in 2016 through 2020 is with this administration and the threats at the time of deportation and illegal aliens and all that great stuff was the mass migration north from the United States into Canada. And then you ended up with your Roxham Road as the unofficial illegal entry point into Canada. And I think our members are sitting back and saying, well, what's going to happen in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months as this administration gets more settled and the agencies that are acting on these executive orders, our partners in the South start to do more of that, are we going to see an increase, basically a wave of migration coming into Canada? And are we resourced in the medium and the long term to actually deal with that as they come up? The stuff going south, I think you're right. It's really nice to see. And I think I was quoted a little while ago by saying this is probably one of the biggest investments in public safety in probably the last 10 to 15 years by the federal government, which is really welcome news. But it's a short-term flash in the pan. We have to have something concerted to be able to actually make it last.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly it's like it might be of interest now, right? It's in the headlines, and then as soon as it disappears, you don't want the funding to just disappear and go elsewhere. So one of the things and we're going to get on to these four recommendations that you had. One thing I quickly wanted to ask was, when we get into these recommendations, was there anything in all the discussions, any crazy out there ideas that people came up with, or some outright you were thinking like, no, that's not going to work? Did anybody have any kind of wild ideas of how we could solve this issue or prevent tariffs or whatever it might be?
No, I mean, we're talking about police unions and law enforcement agencies and associations really talking to each other about operational solutions versus, I mean, obviously it would be nice to give someone a happy pill and then they realize there's no problem and then, no tariffs come, right? But none of that crazy stuff was discussed. It was really about what are their members seeing on the ground. In the short term, are we adequately resourced to actually have an impact? And really, what's the longer term plan for going south, but also coming north, that we could make joint recommendations? And our recommendations have gone south of the border as well, including north of the border. So that was where we're kind of at. There was no off the cuff crazy ideas.
I just thought, like, maybe if they had you in the room, maybe somewhere in these discussions, they had a self-proclaimed expert, or the politicians come in and they go, "Hey, let's do this crazy thing," and you're like, "That won't work." I could see if it's all operationally geared people, it's going to be a lot more realistic. So that's good.
Yep.
So one of the first recommendations that you have was talking about removing the barriers in the procurement process. So this is around new technologies and equipment. It's just talking about getting the technology to the front lines faster. So when you're having those discussions, can you kind of contextualize this for the average listener? What exactly holds up a procurement process? And is this just, we have 15 people I have to ask for permission when I really only need 5? Or, what does that actually look like? What holds these things up?
It is, I would say, probably 45, not even 15.
Okay.
And so it is, and this was relatively consistent regardless of jurisdiction, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Ontario or whether it's in Quebec, federally, provincially, or state, was actually. So if we're going to, use the example, the most prominent media one is the RCMP leasing Black Hawk helicopters, for example. Well, why did they lease them? Well, they needed to act quickly. The Black Hawk platform, as it is an approved tool for the RCMP, and they have been looking at purchasing them on their own to create that as an RCMP asset within RCMP Air Services. Just never got to the point where they did the RFP or the request for proposals and went through procurement. So they weren't even at that stage yet. So it's an approved piece of equipment. We need to act quickly. We need to show that we're taking this seriously. So they went to a company. They actually leased these helicopters so that they could have them actually up in the air and patrolling relatively quickly. One of the challenges with procurement now, obviously, is even if they had done the request for proposal, even if they had accepted bids, That's like a year-long process in itself. And they were ready to place an order with Sikorsky. Sikorsky is a pretty sought-after manufacturer worldwide. So
Oh,
if we were to order Black Hawk helicopters tomorrow, we would be on the waiting list along with all sorts of militaries and national guards worldwide, and probably have to sit and wait for 2 to 3 years before Sikorsky gets around to order number 722
yeah.
and starts to build and deliver helicopters for the RCMP. That happens with drones. That happens with infrared technologies. That happens with cyber technologies. Whether it's radar, whether it's listening devices, whether they're all of that stuff. So there is the authority within Canada for the federal government to allow departments to bypass the normal procurement process
Hmm.
if there's a threat to national security or economic integrity. So that's kind of where we were hinting at in this recommendation is if you see a live threat to your economic integrity or your national security, you will have the authority to allow the commissioner, the president of the CBSA, to bypass the normal procurement process and acquire whatever piece of tool or technology you deem necessary to implement to ensure that economic integrity and national security.
Yeah. I think if I look at policy, and I know nobody likes to look at policy, but things could be in there for a certain reason, but nobody ever goes back and updates it for the times. And it's like the criminal code. I remember you had to, when I first started, some 10-ish years, 12 years ago, they were talking about faxing in there, and you had to like fax off your ITOs or something. And it's like, we have email. Like, can we not come up with a secure way to do this? So it's just that, hey, let's update this process and get things moving faster because we have all this stuff available to us. Certainly in the recommendation here, it talks about keeping up with criminal trends and behaviors. And that is a massive one I see from the organized crime side. They're getting all these new technologies and trying out all new sorts of cool gadgets. And then we find ourselves kind of behind. And it's like, well, if I want to ask for something, it's, several layers of permissions I got to get, several briefing notes I got to type up. And, it's just, it takes so long. It's so slow. So I think it's a good point, a good recommendation that you have.
Well, hopefully it works.
Yeah. So on the second one here, you're talking about expanding fully integrated specialized units. So this is to do with the information sharing, collaboration. One thing I'm wondering on this is, and I know we have some issues with even within a department itself, communication is always a problem. So how are you finding the communication between these different agencies, especially across the border? Is there are we looking at a common system that everyone's going to use? Or is it more just the person to person contact that you're looking for in this recommendation?
Well, actually, that one's twofold.
Hmm.
So, integration obviously has shown to be extremely effective, right? In Alberta, a prime example is the alert teams, right?
Yeah.
Where you pull in members from different police services and they all work under one banner and they share best practices and knowledge of different targets within different jurisdictions. It's shown to be extremely effective. In BC, the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, the Organized Crime Agency, in the RCMP, obviously, when we're talking about border, we could talk about the integrated border enforcement teams, or we talk about the marine safety enforcement teams, the ship rider program, for example, that had a number of ships up until 2013, where the RCMP, the Canadian Coast Guard, the US Coast Guard, CBP, CBSA all worked together.
Yeah.
And basically on a ship. And they enforced federal laws from both jurisdictions. That 49th parallel line just did not exist for them. And we have seen a shrinkage in that. And that's why this investment, I think, is important, because now you can actually bolster those integrated teams, whether it be working in Surrey on Zero Avenue, or whether it be in Alberta at the Coutts border, or whether it be in Manitoba and Emerson across that line, or in the Swanton sector, between Cornwall and New Brunswick across the Quebec border. actually having integrated teams that share intelligence, whether it be the FBI, Homeland Security, CBP, Border Patrol, ICE, the RCMP, the Police of Jurisdiction, CVSA, actually working together and identifying targets that may be bringing a truckload of guns up across this border to interdict and stop that, or a load of fentanyl going south to interdict and stop that is key.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece of that is, actually integrating different agencies, regardless of the border, into the other agencies. So is there a reason we can't send a member of the RCMP or the OPP or the Sûreté Quebec or the Alberta Sheriffs or the whatever to actually work south of the border with Customs, Border Protection, and Border Patrol, and actually integrate them into that agency? I mean, we do it all the time with our liaison officers. They'll be working in Seattle, they'll be working in LA. You mentioned you worked with the DEA, probably a fairly large multinational file, right? Integrating our members south of the border, integrating their members north of the border, having greater exposure, which reduces that communication barrier across that invisible 49th parallel, and hopefully would increase the ability to enforce.
That's the exact point I've been harping on. I've been preaching this to the unit I was just in, so gang suppression team, and saying to them, like, if we got we got a source handler here who's got good info about something going on down in San Diego.
Yep.
Why aren't we sending that one member down there, work with them locally, cut off the thing down there, right? Cut off the drug supply, choke it right off down there. We don't have to spend the money when it gets up into Canada. And now we're trying to find all the bricks or whatever it is, save ourselves $1 million investigation. And we just had to pay for a hotel for a few nights, right? And a per diem for some member.
Yep.
Way smarter way of policing.
I've seen that there's been a couple of headlines recently of that actually working. So border security integration working really effectively, and it's the Cornwall Regional Task Force. So I'll give a shout out to the members of the RCMP, the OPP, CVSA, Customs, Border Protection, as well as the FBI. They work together, and the 49th parallel doesn't exist. Right? Our members help them south of the border. They help us north of the border. They share intelligence, and they've just made in the last 2 weeks, 3 arrests for human trafficking, trying to take people south, and picked up 14 or 16 innocent victims. And it works really well when it's done, and when it's funded, and when the target is what the target is.
Yeah. Do you know how the RCMP is deciding on how they allocate the resources or the funding to these different units? Because there's so many across Canada. So how are they choosing like which one we're gonna either stand up completely or give more money to, like the Shiprider program?
I think most of it right now is focused on the IBET side of the world, the Integrated Border Enforcement Teams. So it's funding now, and again, short-term flash in the pan. Don't know what the medium or the long-term plan is. They have been moving resources from other federal units, our reserve program, the part-time retired members that can come back and work day to day, into IBET teams to bolster border security, whether it be in the Swanton sector in Alberta or in Quebec and Ontario, or whether it be south in Alberta or Manitoba or whatever. And then obviously those helicopters, it's a big price to pay for some really hot looking pieces of metal, but they do have an impact. I don't know if you've ever heard of Black Hawk flying low coming towards you, but it's a very impressive sound. So,
didn't they? Were the Blackhawks used in Manitoba? They just found 6 people trying to cross the border. I think the Blackhawks were involved in that, were they not?
Yeah, in Manitoba or Alberta, in the prairie, the Western Blackhawk that they're using did just make an introduction over a while ago. Yeah.
Okay. So just talking about this third recommendation that you have here. So the better utilization of the Cross-Border Crime Forum.
Mm-hmm.
This is to have more of an alignment on the security and law enforcement initiatives. I've never heard of this forum. Who are these people and what do they do?
I hadn't either until we started doing some research about it.
Oh,
I have to give credit to my staff about researching this. It's fairly new. It's only the last 4 years that it was created under Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden. And from what I understand, it's kind of like the Minister of Public Safety in Canada, as well as the Attorney General in Canada, go down to Washington and they meet with the Secretary of Defense and the chief of staff for the president, and they talk about cross-border crime trends.
oh, okay.
So it's an extremely high level, small player, not a big audience. So I think it would be wise to maybe increase the audience and the participation of folks at those meetings. Obviously, they've seen value come out of it. I've read some of their memos, on the Canada.ca webpage where they report back. But let's bring in some people from boots on the ground or maybe have a way to filter information up about the trends that they're actually seeing versus just making it a political meeting.
Yeah.
Because there can be value there.
And speaking to that, like this is the whole telephone game thing. I 100% agree. You need somebody that is at least close to the front lines to really talk about trends, because once it starts going up the chain of command, sometimes, not saying everybody, but sometimes you get people in there that just want to make things look a certain way so that they can keep their jobs or spin a certain narrative. I really think it is important that you have some representation from the front lines in there, because they're the ones who are going to know. They're the ones out there talking to the informants. They're out there talking to the criminals. They're getting the information. So it's going to be the most firsthand, the closest thing you can get to it. But obviously, if they're talking at these high levels, the room's not going to be open for 500 people. So it's going to be real selective of who gets in that room, I guess. Do you think, would they look to include the NPF, or would that just be RCMP kind of brass in there?
I don't know. Well, we developed these recommendations. Obviously, we've sent them south of the border to the borders are and different folks, as well as the agencies that we met with. And I asked our staff, I said, let's make some inquiries to see if we can, maybe even just be an observer at the start. Because, if you're an observer sitting on the side of the room, someone in the room might say, I'd like to hear what that guy's got to say.
Yeah.
And who knows?
Yeah.
And I think the more agencies from a boots on the ground perspective can actually produce evidence-based, intelligence-led, actionable recommendations, then the more they're going to be willing to listen to us as a whole, right? And I don't mean just us. I mean, all of us, because we come to the table with solutions that make sense versus just crazy ideas.
Yeah. Well, and I would even say maybe more concrete ideas, right? What you're offering some, again, that tangible piece to it, where it's not just, pie in the sky. Hey, let's hug things out and make everything better. Well, how are you actually going to do that? So on your fourth recommendation here, it is just talking about addressing the staffing issues and looking at some long-term staffing plans. So either recruiting more or finding more innovative ways to utilize current shared resources. And this also plays into kind of protecting the mental health of the membership. I'm wondering, do you know currently, like, what are the staffing issues like in the RCMP? Is both the recruiting and retention still an ongoing issue? I know it is for most police services. So
the RCMP, obviously, I mean, we're catching up. We've been net positive from a recruitment versus a retention, probably for almost 5 years now. So more people joining, training, graduating than retiring, and that's 200 to 400, give or take, a year more. The challenge is, obviously the COVID pandemic challenged us, put us in a 700 or 800 member deficit because of the shutdown of the training academy and all that great stuff. And the mandate, as you know, of police officers in Canada has been ever growing, and the demand for more. I haven't seen um, one police service across Canada that has been not been asking for more bodies
Okay.
from its police service board or from its province or whatever. Everybody's asking for more bodies because the demand, Canada's growing, populations are growing. The demand for police services is actually growing. And the RCMP is no different from that. And then you add in that most police services obviously had challenges in recruiting through 2020 to 2022, through the pandemic, training academies shut down. It takes you a while to catch up. Everybody's feeling a bit of a pinch. So this recommendation obviously is, again, the short-term and the medium-term plans. The RCMP can meet the need. We can redeploy members temporarily. We can take newly graduated members from depot and send them to Border Patrol for 30 days and rotate them through. But that's not sustainable in the long term.
Mhm.
And the serving members, and we heard this from the Surgeons Quebec, from the OPP, as well as other agencies south of the border, is if you are going to give a new mandate, which this is, we need to think about the mental health and the burnout of those who are doing that new mandate. Our members are, you're taking someone from Lac La Biche, Alberta, for example, and sending them to border security near Coutts, Alberta for 30 days. Well, now somebody's got to pick up the shifts in Lac La Biche.
Yeah.
And that means 30 days of overtime or, whatever. And that's going to lead to resource shortages and drains in that community, which is an increased file load for those remaining members. So we have to think, how do we plan for the long term to ensure that the membership, as well as the communities we serve, are healthy and get a healthy police officer, not exhausted by the time they show up.
Okay. You were talking about the recruits going to the border. That was one thing I did want to ask. So was that a real plan? Like, are they still considering it, or was that just a consideration for a time being?
I think it's still a live idea. Whether or not it's going to be acted on, we don't know yet. So
I'm wondering, is the NPF good with that, or is there membership that is looking or would like those opportunities? I'm surprised they would send people right out of depot
Yep.
and be like, "Hey, you can go work at the border," because it's not I guess what they might think of as their primary function per se, like going out and responding to 911 calls and giving tickets or whatever that might look like. But all of a sudden going to the border right out of class, and it might only be for 30 days. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you kind of explain that to somebody? Hey, you're not actually going to live there. You're going to move from your family for 30 days, and then you'll go to your posting. Like,
Yep.
What was that going to look like?
And I think details to be determined. Like I wouldn't expect, and the RCMP hasn't come to us with this proposal. It's just ideas that have been floated around about how they could manage this particular short-term, mid-term manpower challenge amidst a new mandate or an expanded mandate for border security. But we did it at Parliament Hill post the 2014 shootings, where the RCMP graduated cadet from depot, was sent to Ottawa and worked the Hill, security on the Hill, for 30 days, and then was sent to their posting of, I don't know, Wetaskiwin, Alberta.
Okay.
However, they're not there by themselves, right? You're working in concert with an experienced police officer. So similar, if they were to do it as a border security, maybe you're sitting in the passenger seat with someone who's got 10 years service. And has worked the border for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's really, it's an added body, it's an added set of eyes, and that don't know what it would look like. And again, it's not something we've discussed or figured out what it may look like. It's just one idea.
Okay. Just kind of finalizing this point, going back to what you were talking about earlier, like who the police of jurisdiction are. So right across Canada, are the RCMP responsible for everything between each port of entry in every province, like even Quebec and Ontario?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, those federal statutes, you know, when you talk about the border, obviously it's the Immigration Act as well as the Customs and Excise Act. So not necessarily and those can be precursors or causes for detention, which might lead to Controlled Drugs and Substances Act or a Firearms Act or a Criminal Code Act, Criminal Code investigation, right? But in order to enforce the illegal entry into Canada or departure, right? Departure, we've actually started using the criminal code. It's the conspiracy to commit an offense,
Okay.
i.e., that offense being illegally into the United States. So arresting in Canada because you're conspiring to enter into a different country illegally. So all of those interesting little things. But yeah, we are the police of jurisdiction for those federal statutes across the entire 49th parallel.
Okay. I just picture someone walking on the middle of a prairie field and they're like right on the line. It's like, you're not crossing, are you? No, I'm not. I'm just going for a walk. You're like, oh, really? What are you doing out in this middle of nowhere? Well, that's interesting. Is there anything else that we didn't really cover today? So those are the 4 recommendations you were talking about. I think we added quite a bit of depth here. Anything else that's kind of coming up here over the weekend or in the near future to do with some changes in law enforcement?
I don't know. I mean, I still haven't seen or been briefed on what the plan for the deployment of the 1.3 billion is. I mean, obviously, we've seen the fanfare around a couple of helicopters, which is great. One of the challenges that we see there, obviously, so pre-December, pre-announcement of funding, pre-lease of Black Hawk helicopters in Manitoba to BC, for example, there was an emergency response team, an extra one.
Okay.
Not really, right? So now you have an entire emergency response team that has been pulled away into border security.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they not doing now, and how are we going to replace that on the ground? Back to the discussion of the member from Lac-La-Biche that goes to the border for 30 days. Somebody's got to backfill them, and that creates vacancies elsewhere. Also, our full-time guys in Ottawa who are now doing the Black Hawk helicopter from the Swanton sector all the way up to New Brunswick, they were doing stuff before. So have we created a vacuum that we need to backfill now as well? Because now we're going to rely more heavily on the people who are not doing the border security. So again, it's back to that mental health piece. How much overtime are people willing to do? And what's the plan long-term to address that? And I really hope that there's some sustained long-term fenced, preferably funding that comes into this so that a future government with austerity ideas or measures can't just roll it back.
And I got to say, I suppose maybe this happening over the winter is helpful for our cause, because when it comes to the summer, if we start seeing more people come across the border, we have more things in place, more of a process set. So maybe this freezing cold weather is good for some things.
Well, you don't see many people swimming across Lake Ontario in the middle of January or February. So
exactly. Cool. Well, that brings us straight to the end of our discussion here. I want to say thanks for coming on the show again. And we'll get you back on here when the next big thing comes up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nathan.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.